So today I am delighted. Welcome to our audio description, our conversation on audio description. We've been doing this now since June, so for almost a year. Very, very excited about this. And it's being sponsored by ArtSpark Texas, but it's brought to describers all around the world. We have had some really wonderful, wonderful conversations, and today is going to be one of those wonderful conversations. I'm really looking forward to it. We have Padraig Naughton, who is from Dublin, and he is the executive director of Arts and Disability Ireland, and recently wrote his his thesis on audio description in live theater and cultural rights of the blind and visually impaired audience. So he comes with that perspective. And then I'm going to try this. Brid
Very, very good. Yes, well done.
is a audio describer, facilitator, and a performer, also from Dublin or from Ireland, and she's also a fluent Irish speaker, the only Irish speaker audio describer in Ireland. So she's bringing that perspective to today's conversation. So let's get started with just having you both introduce yourselves a little bit better than I did, and then maybe tell us your first experience with audio description. And Porg, do you want to go first?
Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. I'm conscious that we were all in different time zones. It's just past 7 p.m. in the evening here in Ireland. It's great to be with you, and thank you, Celia, for inviting myself and Brid. It's really great to have this conversation. So I am executive director of an arts organisation called Arts and Disability Ireland. Just very briefly, we say we champion the creativity of artists, we promote inclusive experiences for audiences, and kind of that, because we're a very small team, we do in partnership with loads of other arts organisations who are trying to engage or involve people with disabilities in what they do. And my first ever experience of audio description, because I am visually impaired, was actually at a London Disability Film Festival on tour in Bournemouth, in England, and it was 2003, and it was a live audio description of the old Todd Browning film Freaks, and which is an amazing film, but the thing that struck me most was there were 2 pages of text, or 2 screens of text at the start of that film, and they were read in their entirety, and I was beside myself with joy, because nobody other than a friend or a family member had ever read anything to me from a screen, like in a TV show or a cinema. And it was so wonderful. And then, of course, because it's an old black and white film, the contrast isn't great for a visually impaired person. So in fact, to have that audio described was amazing. And I remember I was working for an organization called Equata, which was the Disability Arts Development Agency in Southwest England. And I remember thinking, well, if the English have this, we should have it in Ireland. And when I then came back to Ireland 2 years later to take on the role of Executive Director of Arts and Disability Ireland, one of my first projects that I wanted to take on was audio description and introducing audio description. There had been one show called Miss Saigon, which had been audio described, and it was a touring show that had toured in from the UK, and it came with its audio description. So that's why it was audio described, but there was no regular service back in 2005. And so I put a project together with Theatre Forum, our representative organisation for the sector, and the Abbey Theatre and the Dublin Theatre Festival, and the first ever show we audio described in 2006 was the all-male version of The Importance of Being Earnest. So that's kind of how I went from being just in awe of what audio description could do for me as a user of the service, to really wanting to bring it to Ireland and get started. So that's how I came to it.
That's great. Well, thank you. And Brid, how about you?
It follows on quite nicely because Padraig is the reason I came to audio description, because he managed to put together funding and run this training course in Dublin. And I was very lucky to have been one of, I think at the time, maybe 4 people who were chosen from a workshop to go ahead and receive full training in audio description for theatre. And my colleague Maureen Hart, she and I are the 2 of that original batch of 4 who are still working. So my first experience of audio description would be Maureen's work, because we went to listen to each other when we were graduating, or when we were trying to gain our qualifications. We did audio description of this play called Last Days of a Reluctant Tyrant by Tom Murphy. I think that was the one we were doing, yeah. And so yes, my very first experience, having just learned what it was and how to do it, my first experience would have been Mo audio describing that play to me, which was beautiful. And we've worked together on so many projects since, and like we I think I meant to put this into a better context. We're a very small island, so you can kind of get to everywhere geographically, certainly small in the context of like Texas. But it's we kind of split the work between us, so we're sort of flitting all over the place now. We used to work a lot together when there were more of us, but now to kind of cover all the bases, we work individually, but still kind of touch base with one another a lot. I think then, sort of on a personal level, then as well, one of the audio description experiences that really stood out for me, I went to the UK and I went to see an opera, and I work in opera as well, called American Lulu, and that was being audio described in the Young Vic Theatre. And that was also my first ever touch tour, and I had flagged it with the box office. I don't have a visual impairment, I'm here sort of out of professional curiosity, but I got to join the touch tour, and the cast were there, and they sang arias from the piece, and they walked us through the costumes and everything, and it was just amazing. So I think that really just made my brain fizz with all of the possibilities, like that, how I could work my own arts practice and facilitation and audio description as a career. So it's very much how should I say, a portfolio career, but it's been working so far, touch wood.
Well, I love that your brain was fizzing. That gave me a really nice visual feeling. It was, it was great. So, for both of you, what do you consider to be the quote unquote bread and butter of audio description? And Porg, do you want to start first on what you think the bread and butter of description is?
Ooh, that's a tough one because yeah, I suppose one of the things I just wanted to start off by saying is that, while I've referenced film and theatre, and Brid has referenced theatre and kind of opera, we Arts and Disability Ireland, with Brid and with Mo and others, have done quite a lot of visual arts audio description as well, both pre-recorded and live. So just to throw that into the mix, the bread and butter of audio description, I think, for Arts and Disability Ireland, is to make as many of the shows, be they exhibitions or performance, And given the fact that we're a small island and we have two audio describers in the Republic of Ireland and a few more north of the border who we do call on from time to time, it is really about trying to give blind and visually impaired people access to the arts that everyone else wants to go and see. So we've never focused specifically on trying to make, let's say, disability work that's made by other disabled artists accessible, although we sometimes do that. It is very much about whatever the creative output is in the Republic of Ireland. That's what we're trying to make accessible. And what's been interesting about that is that it's changed a lot over the years. When we started working with Brid and Mo and another colleague of theirs who trained at the time, Emer Cassidy, who is a wonderful audio describer as well, but went off to do other things, I think the shows were bigger and less improvised and less experimental. And over the years, they've got smaller, they've got more experimental, and in many instances, they've got more improvised. And so there's challenges coming all the time, like, except for the work we do with the Bord Gosh, which is is our main venue. It's a 2,000-seater plus venue that would have a lot of the West End and Broadway type shows. So, you know, it has Wicked several times. It has Warhorse. It's, you know, in fact, I heard Come From Away being advertised going in there in a few months. It has Hamilton coming up, I think September, October this year. So you know the type of venue I'm talking about. And then the Abbey Theatre, which is our national theatre. But a lot of the other venues and touring venues that we would work with and that Brid and Mo would work with, you're kind of 100-seater to 400-seater and a lot shorter runs. And that's the other thing that's and kind of all of those things have changed. So we started very much with the larger shows, and actually as time has gone on, shows have got a bit smaller. And then also they've become, it's become, I think, trickier to audio describe. And so when you say the bread and butter, I think it's a bit of a movable feast. It's not standard. Let's put it that way. And maybe Brid, you'd be better to pick up on some of the challenges there.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that the core, as it would seem to me, and this is kind of answering your point as well, Padraig, is that and this works for both an individual show and my practice as an audio describer, that the idea is if something is readily available to anyone, it should be readily available to everyone. So I think quite early doors after we qualified, there was an arts exhibition. There was an exhibition in the National Gallery, and like, I'm not trying to shame anyone, but it didn't happen to be audio described. But the point was, it was a major Leonardo da Vinci exhibition, and at the time there was a question mark over whether one of the pieces, I think it was Salvator Mundi, was it of Da Vinci or not. So there was this was in the newspapers. People were talking about it on the radio. It was very much a live topic of anyone who had a passing interest in the arts. And it just struck me at that time, new to the industry as I was, like, what a shame that this wasn't also available to visually impaired people in Ireland, because wouldn't they want to discuss, you know, the ins and outs of it as well? And, you know, it's like, it's when a piece of art comes up, or when I'm saying visual arts, but it happens all the time. Like if there's a film that comes out, like that's really visually striking, and I just feel there are people we're leaving out of the conversation. You know, it's that idea of why shouldn't somebody be able to hop into an engaged conversation about funding the arts? They don't maybe have the same stakehold because they're not getting to see the plays, because the plays aren't audio described. So you're not just blocking somebody from engaging with the art form, you're blocking them from engaging in the natural conversations that surround that art form. And so then, like, on the micro scale of that, when I'm audio describing a play, there's that moment of, if the audience giggle and it's not from something that was said, my job is to make sure that everybody who has a visual impairment knows what the giggle was for. So it's inclusion. I mean, I suppose that's the basis for everything that we try to do, is it's inclusion, that nobody is needlessly excluded.
There's just 2 quick points I'm going to add in there, and
Yeah,
I
go right
know
ahead.
this is very different in Ireland and Europe in comparison to the US, where government, the national government and local government, through different agencies, be it local authorities or a national arts council, etc., are very heavy funders of the arts. So, you know, it could be up in the funded arts sector, it could be up to, you know, anything between 50 and 70% of the budget, the yearly budget for an arts organization, may be provided in one way or another by the state. And I do feel really, really strongly, to follow on from Brid's point, that if taxpayers are investing that amount of money in the arts, then the art should be accessible to all its citizens. It's that simple. Now, I know in the US, the way the arts is funded is totally different. In fact, it's probably completely the opposite, in that, you know, there may be 20 to 30% state and government funding if you're lucky. But that's the way it works here. And I think that's just so really important to bear in mind.
That's great, Padraig, and it is, but that's why we look to Ireland and to our friends across the pond to sort of show us how it can be done to include all citizens. And during our conversation to get ready for this, Brid, you said, right, you know, you said it very simply. You said storytelling is at the heart of audio description. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, okay, that it's a personal thing, and I'm sure other people can relate, but for me, storytelling in all its shapes and forms has been at the core of my life. And it's, you know, I've done a lot of different jobs over the years, but I keep coming back to that. You know, I studied archaeology and folklore in university. I worked in children's television programming, the kind of thing that you would see on a public service broadcasting in the US. I did a lot of that, and so really just telling our stories. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why I mentioned that I was an Irish speaker in my bio, is because um, we have access, when you speak Irish, you just have access to a whole lot more material that tells the story of Ireland that you might not have access to. Like, so there's, you know, historical documents and folk tales, and, you know, there's just a huge trove there that if you only spoke English in Ireland, you might not have as much access to. So for me, storytelling and making sure that, yeah, just making the story as alive as possible is at the core of everything that I do in my arts practice. So then, as an audio describer, that really informs my decisions. Like, when I'm looking at a play and I have a moment to speak, and I have maybe 5 things I could tell you that are going on, including, you know, somebody's just changed their clothes and it is daytime now instead of nighttime. And it's, you know, there are several things, there's several pieces of information. What do I have time to say? I have time to say one thing. So I'm going to tell you the thing that is most core to the narrative. So keep you at a, you know, at the same pace as everyone else who's getting the story as much as possible. And if that means telling you that it's, you know, later that evening, then later that evening is what I say. But if it's more important that you know that somebody went and completely changed their clothes, because this is a reference to something Padraig said to me before, that I had described a film and that I mentioned that somebody's scarf was tainted with blood. And because she had hit her head, basically. And that was in, so it's, dabbed her forehead with a blood tainted scarf or something like that was what I said in the film. And he hadn't been aware. You'd seen the film already. I don't know, Padraig, if you remember this
I
anecdote.
do. The
but
film was
do
Tom and
you?
Mary. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and you knew this. I think you might have even been involved in funding it. But that was the whole film had been made, and he had even seen a cut of it. And that was something that nobody had told him, and it was quite important. So I guess that's that thing of like, if you just stay true to the story, you may not always have time to say everything, but it will keep you honest. It will keep you alive to the most vital pieces of information that will help people stay on the course, stay on the narrative course with everyone else.
So
Yeah,
this is
and in fact, that was absolutely crucial because while I understood the film, the one thing I hadn't understood was the trouble the director had gone to help me understand the narrative, because I'd missed that little bit, and it was absolutely crucial to one of the to kind of squaring the circle as to why one of the characters in the film had died.
Yes.
I knew they died, but I didn't quite know the connection with the character that had died and the other character who wiped their face or head with the bloodstained scarf. And actually, that's where, for me, audio description is so important. And in fact, when you were saying about audience giggling, I remember Brid, and I think you yourself or Mo would have worked on the adaptation of the Playboy, The Western World, a contemporary version of it, which is a sing play, but it was brought up to date by two Irish writers, Roddy Doyle and B.C. Adigun. And
that was one of Mo's shows.
Yeah. But there's a moment in that show where it actually is set in a bar in West Dublin. And one of the characters goes behind the bar and he pours a pint of Guinness and he tops it with a can of Red Bull. Nothing is said, but the audience, of course, roll around the place when they see this concoction. And that's another instance where that joke, which is a kind of a visual joke, is entirely missed by even a visually impaired person who has some useful vision.
Yeah, it calls to I was going to say, it calls to mind the decisions that describers have to make. Brid, you said you've got 4 things that maybe are there. You have to choose one. And, oftentimes describers might choose the most obvious thing, whereas really what needs to be described is something that is maybe lesser obvious, least obvious, but because it drives the story or brings the information to the viewer, like someone pouring Red Bull on a Guinness, that might be a detail that a describer might miss. They might just say tops it off with something, but doesn't pick up the detail of it being Red Bull. And so that's part of the hard decisions that describers have to make when there's just a few seconds or to describe something when there's a few things going on. So I like the notion about maybe not the most obvious is the correct choice in every situation.
The other thing I might add to that is that, like, and I know Padraig has talked about working in one of our very large venues. Often when I'm doing that, I'm getting a feed from the stage. I'm getting the microphones of the mic'd up actors in the musical. Almost everywhere else, our actors aren't mic'd in Ireland. I know it's quite often in America, actors are mic'd, but it means that when I'm listening to a show, I'm hearing a mic that's in the auditorium. So I'm hearing the audience. So I find it very, very difficult to audio describe when all I can hear is the play. you know, because one of the things that informs me so much is what are the audience giggling at, or, you know, especially if it's a comedy, and I might be in the auditorium watching it, laughing, missing 3 lines of dialogue because I'm laughing and trying to scribble down notes. So you go and see a show a couple of times, and a part of what you're doing is other people will catch things that I can't. I can't catch everything, you know. So listen to other people, listen to what they're tickled by, listen to what they're shocked by. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll actually, like, people will start talking almost. You're like, I can't believe he just said that, you know. And it's those sorts of moments are brilliant. And you, especially if we've had a few plays. I certainly have described a few plays where the target audience, they might be very talkative, and so I try to have that then in my audio description. I'm kind of going, I'm going to keep this as sparing as I can, because I want the visually impaired person in the auditorium to also be able to enjoy the audience reactions, because they're part of the spectacle now, you know. So sometimes it's not even just what's on the stage that you're trying to make room for, it's the other people in the space with you.
That's interesting. And that kind of leads us to the next question topic we were pondering, and that is the responsibility of individuals who are blind to give feedback like this to describers, you know, feedback as a patron, and also with the advancement of people who are blind as describers or as partners to describers, their responsibility to give feedback as a person who is blind, working together to write scripts. So, Padraig, how do you feel? What is the responsibility of the audience, let's say, for whenever possible to give feedback to a describer?
Ooh, yeah, I was intrigued by this question because I have very mixed feelings about it. Feedback is always very useful. And from time to time over the years, I've gone to see shows, particularly if we're working with a new venue, or it's a particularly, so if we're working with a new venue, or maybe it's a new art form, like we wouldn't do that many audio descriptions of dance, although we've done some. And so you'd kind of go to those shows and professionally give feedback. And that, I think, you know, as Arts and Disability Ireland, is part of our role. I think getting feedback from blind and visually impaired audiences is particularly tricky, in that you can't easily give them audience questionnaires that they're going to, and a pen, and say, fill that out. That doesn't work very well. I have on one occasion where I wanted to assemble a focus group, went around with a pen and piece of paper and spotted all the blind people during the interval, and said, if you come to the focus group, I'll buy you a drink, what you want, in the bar afterwards, see you there. And we got 7 people to the bar, and it was great. And we sat for an hour and we chatted through kind of the key issues. And people are very generous with their time, but I think one thing we got to remember is that for many people going to see a show, they're not doing it professionally. It's an afternoon out or an evening out. It's a family occasion. It's a shared cultural experience. You know, I always say to people that, you know, the first date I had with my now wife was to go and see Marco Rose Terminus. And
I'm doing a shocked face, Padraig, just so you know.
Several
I'm doing
people
a
have
big
asked me, how was there a marriage after that
because
show?
I've seen Terminus, yeah.
But
anyway,
if you look up the film, he also wrote a film script which is much tamer, and quite good, called Intermission. You might get a sense of it. But anyway, we went to see that show, and it wasn't audio described, but we were on a date. So even if it had been audio described, I wouldn't really have wanted to have any interaction with the audio describer afterwards. So, and I also remember another instance which kind of illustrates this is I remember working with not Brid or Mo, other audio describers, and we were handing out equipment in the in the foyer, and they spotted the first blind person come through the doors. They ran over to them with the audio description equipment and said, "Here's your audio description headset, and I'm going to start reading the program notes. You can go into the auditorium now." To which this man responded, "I'm out for the afternoon. If that works in the bar, it's grand. I'm going for a pint. And if I can listen to it there, fine. And if I can't, I'm going to skip it." So there is always a challenge. And I don't know if there is an easy answer. I do think you develop, you have regular people who come to shows and they will feedback, and people are very generous with their time. But I think we've got to sometimes think that, they are out for an evening, and therefore we need to give them space, and we need to figure ways of encouraging them to give feedback. And I know some people, some arts venues would use mystery shoppers, so they actually give them a small fee to be deliberately available afterwards to give feedback. I know when we were training Brid and Mo, the simple question the examiner asked myself and another blind person who went to hear them audio describe is, "Would you ask for your money back now that you've heard the show?" But those are some of my thoughts.
That's great. That's great. And so, Brid, from your point of view as a describer, do you seek out feedback from Padraig and other people, and how does that affect your work as a describer?
I am going to be very selfish here. I would love more feedback. In general, the way things work here is that we'll say the service is run usually through the venue or sometimes through the production company, and Padraig's organization, Arts and Disability Ireland, would very effectively spread the word among the community. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't have a direct connection to my customers. So I turn up to, we audio described Aladdin a couple of weeks ago. I turn up on the day. I don't know. I know there are going to be punters because nobody has told me, no, you're not needed today, but I don't know if there's going to be 2 people or if there's going to be 12. I don't know. So it's a bit disjointed that way. Whenever I speak to the venues, I always say, listen, if you can develop a relationship with your audiences who repeatedly look for audio description, that would be very useful to me, because you can grow your audience by talking to them and getting them to spread the word, and that I can also then maybe contact them and ask them for feedback. So some organizations, certainly the Abbey Theatre, that's our national theatre, they would be very successful at doing that and have good working relationships with their regulars, who will often they will often write very nice emails when maybe when a show was particularly complicated. Or I always think of like the Shakespeare history plays, like if you go to see a King Henry or something like that, where there's multiple, there's Northumberland and there's Edgar, there's whatever, there's all these characters, and you don't know, you don't know how they relate to one another. And that's one of the jobs that I would have in that, is to, you know, make sure that those lines are, this is the son of so and so, and these are the people who are trying to get to the throne. And, you know, so you can get some really flattering emails back where you made sense of something that was incredibly dense or incredibly complicated. But equally, like, I've had feedback via some venues kind of going, I don't know if I find the use of, or the description of color. So I would describe light changes, sorry, changes in lighting states. You know, if there was a lot of heightened, like non-naturalistic lighting in a show, I might go into that. And then somebody perhaps who has been blind since birth may not find that particularly useful. But then equally another audience member who has lost their sight, it's an age-related sight loss issue, you know, that they have a lifetime of associating color with a feeling or a temperature or whatever. And so for them, knowing that the stage is blood red is useful, you know. So I guess the other thing is, no individual can really speak for all visually impaired people, because there are so many different types of impairment. But I guess I'm going to come back to my first statement after all of that and say I am always open to feedback, because I can never know. Hopefully, I don't have a visual impairment. I can never know what they need in the moment. And the best way I can try to be of service to them is if they let me know what's useful to them. So yeah, so it is both
Yeah.
vital and also very difficult to attain and to apply.
I think everyone on this call can relate to that, because your story of showing up at the theater, you don't know who's in the audience, how many people, you don't have any access to them, is pretty standard, I think, in a lot of situations. However, there's sort of a new uh, practice here in the States, and maybe abroad, to try to send out questionnaires to actors and to find out, how would you describe yourself, you know, what is your, and so this notion of wanting to be respectful of the actor in relationship to the character, in relationship to what your job is, which is to say what you see is in front of you. And, you know, and all of that has made describing, I think it's added a new little kind of uh, you know, issue, problem, challenge, shall we say, into the describer. And so I was wondering if you had your thoughts on that, in terms of this idea that we want to get the actors more involved in the description. And I actually heard a piece on one BBC or something, that was talking about the Royal Shakespeare Company and how they have characters actually doing the audio description. So they're describing what's happening from the point of view of the character of, you know, Puck, or I can't remember. And so that's new for me. I mean, because it really also takes it away from, you're actually describing or talking about the inner feeling of the character, because that's what, this is how I'm feeling, or this is how I'm looking at something. So it's really kind of branching off in areas that are we getting away from the core principle of audio description to say what's in front of you? Porg, you're smiling. What do you think?
Yes. Unfortunately, I think the aspiration of creative audio description it's a wonderful aspiration, but it's a bit like letting designers, I mean print designers, design your print program and giving them no guidance at all. They're sure as hell, as you do it, they will definitely put loads of text across pictures. You know, some of the worst audio description I've come across has been creative audio description, because very often the focus is on the creative, not on the access. And I think it's got to be access first. And, you know, there's somebody I know in the UK who describes it as boring audio description. Well, yeah, but it does what it's meant to do. You know, that when I go to see a performance or an exhibition, I want to engage with the work that's there. And the audio description should assist me to do that and fill in the visual gaps that I can't fill in. And for me, that's absolutely crucial. Now, over the years, I've seen a few good examples of creative audio description. There was a play a few years ago by Johnny McKnight and Robert Softly Gale called Windy Hoose, and it's available to as a Kindle online, and they have very cleverly integrated audio description so that the whole audience are part of hearing the audio description. So they've created the audio describer as a character. It's a fairly racy play, and the audio describer is a prude and much older than the characters in the play. And it creates a really good contrast. It's essentially, the setup is is essentially a guy who goes to hook up with a girl that he's met on Tinder, and he arrives at her house in a housing estate on the edge of Glasgow, and finds she has no legs, wants to leave, but can't get a taxi out of the place because no taxi will come into the housing estate. So he's stuck. And that's essentially the play. That's the setup of the play. But there was really clever access there. So, for example, the audio describer, as I say, was Prude, and she was speaking throughout the play, and it was kind of, it was quite funny, and it really, really worked. And they had a sign language interpreter who was being broadcast through the TV that was in the bedroom. And they had captioning that was displayed like text messages would display above the stage. And it was, so that can work, but that takes a huge amount of thought and effort. One of the wonderful things about it is then the access is available at every performance. And that is quite special for audiences with disabilities, because so often we're limited to one or two shows. Like in Ireland, normally, it's usually one show you do per performance run, I think, Brid, in most venues. So it's it's a really, there are huge benefits if we could get it right, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And I think part of the reason it doesn't work is the creative ends up leading the access, and we really need to focus on the access.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it reminds me of the what's happening in audio description around extended description, where like, which works in an educational environment where you maybe have to stop the video to provide information that's not being provided in the script. And I'm reminded again, I was listening to King Charles' coronation, and how the narrator did a very good job describing the carriage and describing what was happening on the street and all of that. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. They're really weaving description into the actual content for everyone. But how do you do that in a traditional stage play? I mean, I don't think you can. I don't think you can have the actor describing what they're wearing and what they're doing while they're doing it, So this notion toward creative description, I do feel has some hurdles to to overcome in order for it to, if it's ever going to be, and well, to do its job, which is to say the visual information that's in front of them.
Just
So,
to go back
go
to,
ahead.
oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Celia. No, I was just going to say, to go back to the other the part of your question about authenticity and, you know, inviting the actors in as well. Um, there's certainly a higher demand now for from companies who have made a decision to be maybe gender blind in their casting, or colorblind in their casting, and then asking for that to be reflected in the audio description. And while I respect the artistic decisions that they have taken, if something is going to I keep coming back to this idea of, if somebody is going to react to something in the room because they can see it, then the visually impaired audience need to be able to react to the same thing. So, like, I think there was a play that I saw where there was a daughter, and the daughter was Black Irish and her parents were white Irish, and there was no reference made whatsoever to adoption or anything like that. But it's going to put a question in people's head. You know, it's just, this is supposedly a family unit, and there has been a decision made to cast in this way, and I, as a sighted member of the audience, I'm going to be wondering about that. It's going to come up in my head. And so, do I then have a responsibility to pass that information on to, say, Padraig or anyone else who's in the audience who has a visual impairment? Yes, I think I do have a responsibility, because then they're experiencing the play in exactly the same way as everybody else. But then, and I know we spoke about this briefly when we were talking before, Celia. I also worked on a play about 2 years ago where all of it's a play by a wonderful playwright called Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, who was actually a character in the play as well. It's a reworking of a play by Dion Boucicault, who's an Irish playwright from the late 19th century, and he wrote a very racist play called The Octoroon, and this was called An Octoroon, and everybody in it was playing not their own race. So I went into detail on, when I was explaining who, say, the character George was, that George had white skin and blonde hair and this and that. But then I would say, so he's being played by Patrick Martins, and I would go to Patrick and say, I need to describe you as an actor. How do you describe yourself? And he said Black Irish. That's how he describes himself. So it was it's Patrick Martins, Black Irish actor, tall, black hair, closely cut hair. There's a description of him. And then when I say he is white, I mean he literally puts like brilliant white face paint on, and he has this like ridiculous straw colored wig, and everything is it's almost clownish. And there was another member of the cast who she identified as South Asian, and she was playing a character called Pete, and she donned an afro wig for it and painted her face black with large red lips, as though she was playing like the minstrels, the black and white minstrels. So I think there's a place for inviting the actors in, but for me so far, that is if I feel the need to identify the actor as distinct from the character they're playing. Because if I'm talking about a real person, I feel, yes, they should get to at least weigh in with me about how they would like to be described.
Just one other thing which I would add in was one of the things that happened a lot when in the early days of audio description, we had huge difficulties with actors not liking the way they were described. And the solution arrived at by one of our venues was just hide those things and make sure they don't see the program notes, at least until after the show has happened. So I think sometimes there's a temptation with actors to want to describe themselves the way they think they would like to be seen, as opposed to the way the rest of the world sees them, either in character or out of character. And I also think for directors, sometimes in the audio description process, when they see the script, they kind of see some of the gaps and things that they probably should have sorted out, or the misconceptions that they've left within their own direction, and they kind of want to correct that. And that's not the job of the audio describer. The audio describer's job is to bring us to the place as visually impaired people where the director and the actors do their job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think about the trend, you know, it's of casting of gender, you know, cross gender, you know, a female playing a male, a female presenting playing a male. Also in terms of different ethnicity and race, the way that we, and so you don't know if that was a directorial choice of the director, you know, ordinarily you think it would be, or was it this was the pool that was available to them? So what is your responsibility in that regard if you've got you know, well, like you say, a Black Irish person playing a typically Caucasian role, but it's not really germane to the play. What is your feeling about that? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
do know. I feel no. It's a good question. I feel that if it's not adding to what I'm doing, I think the other example I was thinking of recently, this is not a play I described. This is a play I went to see. It was a version of Julius Caesar in London, and a really terrific actress by the name of Adjoa Ando was playing Cassio, and Cassio is a male role, and nothing was changed. I don't think they weren't changing pronouns in the script or anything like that. I mean, there isn't that much of talking about Cassio in the third person anyway. So, but it was like, you know, I think at one point in the play, somebody refers to Cassio's wife, and they didn't change that to Cassio's husband or anything like that. So it really was just Shakespeare's word. And what we needed for the role of Cassio was somebody who was who sounded trustworthy and reliable and sage, you know. And if anyone had seen, you know, Google her. She's a wonderful actress. She's been in a lot of oh, you know what? She's in Bridgerton. That's the most recent thing she was in. But she embodies all of those things. So if I were doing if I were doing program notes for that, I think I might just say Cassio is played by Adjoa Ando, and then describe the costume or describe her physicality, and not go into Cassio is ordinarily played by a man, but in this production it's blah blah blah. I don't know if that level of detail is necessary, because the character traits of Cassio come across in the dialogue of the play, and she performed it excellently. So the actor in the script did all the heavy lifting, and all you need to do then, the last bit of it, is to just go, you know, this actor equals that role, and this is how this is their physical appearance, and this is what they're wearing, and you know, whatever else. That just give, you don't need to maybe give all of the ins and outs of it, and whether it's a male part written, you know, whether it's written as a male part or whether it's whatever. I think just if the production is strong enough, let the production do the talking.
The other
Right.
thing though, within, you know, program notes or the audio introduction, because it takes different names depending on where you are in the world, can I think you can separate to describing the individual actors, maybe set up the context that the director has tried to achieve. And you may find, for example, that will even exist within the program. You know, I remember going to see The Lion King, and there was a really wonderful description. There's wonderful descriptions of the masks, but there actually was a separate piece in the audio introduction program notes about how the masks were made and the history of these type of masks. And sometimes that context can be really, really useful, because if you're a blind person and you've never actually maybe handled a mask, only maybe what you've seen it, what you felt at Halloween, let's say, these are very different masks to Halloween masks. So I think there are ways of doing it. And also sometimes this information can be hugely useful. I think sometimes we forget that some of that context can be really useful to loads of audience members. And that's why I'm saying you may well find it in the general program. So there, I think for an audio describer to get as much material as they can in advance and background can be really helpful, as well as the video, whatever format that happens to come in, and the script, etc., etc. But all those things kind of come together to help kind of contextualize what's going on stage and when it's happening.
So we've come up on our hour. I think this is a great place to end with the sort of circling around to the beginning, that really audio description to me is about access to information. And this notion of providing background information in another format is really great, when we think about that. And I want to thank you both for coming and talking. I could talk to you for a lot longer. I love what you're doing in Ireland, and Brid wanted everyone to know that Ireland only has 5,000 people, right? So
No, 5 million.
Oh, 5 million. I was going to say.
Yeah. No. So it's just that I know it sounds strange when we say there's only 2 audio describers working in theatre in the whole nation, but it's only 5 million people in total. So that's like smaller than the city of Houston. So yeah, we're just about covering it between the two of us. But I think even that, Padraig, it might be time for us to get some new blood into the system.
And then the other thing is we only have 2 producing houses and a plethora of production companies. So while we have a vibrant sector, and we do, the arts and culture is wonderful in Ireland, and I think Ireland punches way above its weight internationally, it's still very small.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go ahead and ask people if they have something they want to just say briefly. We'll ask Brid and Padraig to stay on for like 5 more minutes. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves and turn on their camera and say hello to either Brid or Padraig, now is the time to do that. Tony Baker has turned on her camera. Did you want?
It's Bader with a D,
Okay,
not
Bader.
a K. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and all of the things that you've touched on are all the things that when we work, I've been doing audio description in Indianapolis in the theaters here for about 25 years. And I have a friend who's been doing it even longer, and we've joined forces. We're starting to mentor people in museums about how to work with the visitors to the museums. And it's really exciting to be able to do that. And we have, anyway, so we have a cadre of describers here in Indianapolis, but unfortunately, COVID shut down a lot of that, and we're still trying to organize the theaters, because most of what they have is not a little place in the sound booth, but a little place somewhere else where you watch the television and listen to the feed from the stage, which is awkward. And any of the theaters that are offering audio description are doing it once during the run. As you said, it's available, but the community doesn't know about it or can't get there. And we're going to start working on that end of it as well. So
Great.
Bravo to the 2 of you for being such stalwart audio describers. I love it.
Thank you,
Not at all,
Tony.
Tony. We didn't get to touch on this much, but we also have these sort of log jams about how do you get the information to our target audiences. So yeah, we're with you on that fight as well.
And the one thing I'd add in for a long time, and it's one of the reasons that we've kind of, when Arts and Disability Ireland started audio description, we managed everything, and we managed the audio describers, and we managed the equipment. And I think in some ways we kind of were the piggy in the middle, or the kind of the link between the venue and the audio describer. And now, as they're working directly with the venues, they're in much more direct contact with them. But one of the big issues we had for years, and was one of the reasons we shifted the way we work, is that the venues saw the audio description and the captioned and sign language audience as ADI's audience, or belong to the audio describer, rather than their audience and their community.
Yeah.
And that's been a really hard push for us to engage them, but it's finally it is happening over recent years. In fact, COVID has brought about a lot of changes, and that from the venues is one of the big changes, is they now want to invest more directly with their audience.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, it seems like people are just taking in everything that we all have talked about. I want to thank Padraig and Brid for being with us today. Had a great conversation. Thank you so much. We really appreciate what you're doing there in Dublin and in Ireland. And for everyone on the call, stay tuned. Our next conversation will be in June. Stay tuned to know who that's going to be with. And we will be sending out a link to this conversation to everyone who is on our list. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, go off and have a good night, both Brid and Padraig. And thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thanks so much,
You're
Celia.
welcome. Thank you.